Hi, welcome to Ekascloud. My name is Jagadish Mapati. Today I'm going to talk about network address translation, which is also called as NAT in networking terms. So what do you mean by NAT? So we need to really understand the networking concept before we can talk about the NAT, and also what do you mean by public and private IP address, because that is all matters within the NAT world. So what is NAT? NAT is obviously stands for the network address translation. What does it do? So it's basically translate the IP address of all the computers in the local network to a single IP address. So this is often used by the router that connects the computers to the internet. The router can be connected to a DSL modem or a cable modem or a T1 line or even a dial-up modem. So as we can see in the picture, this is a typical connection which will be present in most homes, residential homes, where any individual will have an end user PC or a computer that is connected to their own private network. What do you mean by that? So basically all the computers at home, they need to connect to the internet. So the internet service provider, ISP, will either provide their own router, or end user or consumer can able to buy their own router to configure their router to connect to the internet. So that router will be having its own IP address, which is like the IP address provided by the ISP. This could be, there are different types of IP address. That could be a static one. Static one is the one which is provided by the ISP, and that will remain constant globally, or very unique globally. So anybody can able to ping our IP address. That is called static IP address. Similarly, we have dynamic IP address, which will be provided by the DHCP server. So this IP address constantly changes. It could be probably changing every 8 hours, or probably during the overnight, or whenever we restart a session. It could be any time, which we are not aware of. But these are the two different types of the IP address, which they will be having a unique IP address of their own. So for example, to understand that, we need to take a real life example. So what is the common activity anyone would do on a computer PC? So basically they open google.co.uk, which is a website. So the moment they open it, they have to send that request. The host computer has to send a request to say, I need to open google.co.uk web page. So obviously the data packet has to travel all the way from the host PC to the private network, and then the router, and then obviously to the internet, and then wherever the Google server is located. So in this, for example, for explanation purpose, we are treating this as a Google server, which is, say, for example, it's a 200.100.10.1. That is the, for the explanation purpose, we are treating that as the Google server IP address. But in reality, this is not, just for the explanation purpose. So how does the data packet travels all the way from host to the server? That is where the NAT comes into picture. Okay, so as we have seen, the host computer is always resides in a private network. So it doesn't have any sort of connection to the internet world as such. So when we send a data packet, or when an end user opens the google.co.uk on their browser, the data packet goes out of the NIC card, which we already discussed in the previous sessions, and then it enters the private network. And by the time when it reaches router, that is when we know that the packet has to hop around different routers before it reaches the end destination, which in this example is the Google server. But for obviously, Google server also needs to send a response back to say that, yes, here is the web page. And when that response data packet comes all the way back from Google, it needs to know where the target is. So in this case, it is the host computer 10.0.1, which is in a private network. So obviously the Google server doesn't know where this private host is. So that is where the NAT comes into picture. NAT is like a function or a service which works within the router. So what it does is it receives all the data packets or the network traffic from the computers from the local or the private network. And then it is going to transform that data packets so that in a way it is going to add its own IP address to the data packet before it start routing it to the end destination. So that means by the time when the Google server receives this request page, it will be having a data packet represented by IP address of the router. So when it is sending the response back, obviously it will go back to the NAT itself, the NAT or the router IP address, which is 150.150.0.1, because that's the only IP address the Google server understands so that it can send a response back. So, but how will the router know or the NAT know where to send that particular data packet from a router to the individual host? Because in this example, we are showing only one host, but in a typical, even in a residential local network or private network, we'll be having multiple computers. So how does the router know which where the data packet needs to be sent in one of those multiple host or PCs connected to the private network? So that is where there's something called NAT table, network address translation table. So network address translation is a service or process where it maintains all the incoming traffic along with its destination address. So it is going to maintain some sort of caching in terms of the table to say, yes, this is the one, the host has 10.0.1 has sent a request, and this is the destination server. So it is going to make an entry. And when the response comes back, it knows what to correlate. And then obviously it is going to send the response only to that particular IP address. So that is what is NAT actually. So in this IP address, in this picture, we can able to see the source IP address is 10.0.1 and the destination is 200.100.10.1. So obviously when we send the packet, it goes to the 150.150.0.1 and then to the destination server. So on the way back, again, it will go to the router, and from their router, it will go back to the individual computer in the private network. So basically, what does NAT do? NAT allows a single device such as router to act as an agent between the internet or the public network, what we call here, and the local network or a private network, which means that only a single unique IP address is required to represent an entire group of computers to anything outside the network. So it also means that a router is having its own IP address, and then it is sharing the internet connection with multiple hosts in a private network. So that means they all will be acting as one single IP address represented by the router. So that's the one which is going to translate before it's sent to the destination server in the public network. Okay, so that is what is NAT. Thank you for listening.